happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 239 for November 17th, 2021. My name is Dr. Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana's state virtual school located on the beautiful University of Montana campus right here in lovely and kind of snowy Missoula, Montana. And joining me tonight, as always, I don't think snow's dropping, but good evening, Dr. Wesley Fryer. How are you tonight, sir?
Good evening, Jason. I am doing great. Wow, snow. It's actually, we had our first freeze on Friday last week, I guess, or maybe it was Saturday. Anyway, we're getting into the 30s tonight, but no snow here yet. But that's a clear sign of fall and moving to winter, so that's exciting.
Absolutely. Yep, and I'm the estimates is that Montana will have a more serious winter this year, which, as long as it comes with snowpack, I am happy to put up with a significant winter if it means less chance for fires in the summer, as the drought still dominates the West. But I don't think we're talking about weather tonight. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room all about?
We are here to meet Peggy George live. Welcome, Peggy. And on the way, we're going to talk about the past week's technology news through an educational lens. So we always have a large lineup of links that you can always find at edtechsr.com/links. And for tonight's show, we have, man, you got to scroll through a long list of shows to get to this page. We have our list of topics. So we can choose from Apple News, tech corrections, security, Microsoft, Google, social media, hardware. A new topic this week, the metaverse, although we have talked about that a couple weeks, miscellaneous, and our geeks of the week. So, Dr. Neiffer, as the host, where would you like to take the ship of Gab tonight?
Well, it feels like we've talked a lot about the kind of practical stuff at the beginning of the show. Maybe we should switch that around. Why don't we go ahead and start with the tech correction and
the esoteric and impractical.
Yes, yeah, no kidding. And yet to come to fruition. So, like, it seems like it's sputtering along, but we'll have to see where it goes. So, you want to start with the Tech Dirt article?
Sure. So on yesterday, November 16th, Tech Dirt reported, the headline is, Facebook whistleblower testifies before Grand Committee on Disinformation, which includes countries that lock people up for criticizing the government. And I had not heard of this very, I guess, well, it calls it Orwellian, grandiose, perhaps, grandiosely titled International Grand Committee on Disinformation. We've been talking the last several weeks about Frances Haugen, who was a former Google employee and Facebook employee, and her testimony before the U.S. Congress. She's been making the rounds in Europe, and in this case, I think this is to maybe folks that were in, I wanted to say Holland, but the point of this article is basically that everyone is posturing to try to regulate social media, and there's all kinds of agendas here. There were parliamentarians from Singapore who were part of this, who were just saying, clearly Facebook can't regulate themselves. We have to, take action. But the author points out that Singapore in 2019 passed it's called Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, the POFMA. And so they were able to use those laws and existing laws to penalize peaceful expression and protest that activists, lawyers, and online media companies had shared, prosecute some of them, bring suits of civil defamation, threats of contempt of court, and basically silence free speech. So another sort of dark side of this whole conversation. I mean, we see this happen with the conversations about Google and journalism. I mean, lots of posturing for different groups that have different agendas, but certainly not everyone who is saying, yes, regulate Facebook, I think has the public interest as we would understand it in the United States in mind. We would certainly, I think, as a nation, support journalists and the ability to stand up against oppressive government, et cetera. And that is certainly not something that is happening in Singapore, and perhaps the authorities are going to use this as an excuse to, make sure that their line is the one that people hear, and opposition voices are silent. So I've not really heard that kind of a take on the tech correction and the push for regulation, and I thought that was an important perspective to bring forward. Although I will admit, Tech Dirt is not necessarily one of my constant reads, and I can't even really, I know I've heard of it before. It's not something that is an unknown news source to me, but I had not heard that particular perspective on the tech correction before.
Yep, that is incredibly interesting. And then I've heard a little bit about this. You want to talk a little bit about the Vice article about the civil war in Ethiopia?
Yeah, so Vice reported on November 8th that Facebook is, well, the headline is how Facebook is stoking a civil war in Ethiopia. And this dovetails with a number of things that we've heard in other places, including from Frances Haugen's testimony that, Facebook has created a platform that has become the de facto internet and communication medium in many parts of the world, yet they have been dismal in their efforts to try and address disinformation, and in some cases even provide a reasonable number of native language speakers in some of these countries. That certainly happened in Myanmar with the genocide and the refugee crisis with the Rohingya minority. And so this is an article detailing how online hate is adding fuel to the country's deadly conflict, and Facebook is failing to stop it. And so it's if as you do research about Facebook globally, there are just numerous cases like this, and these were detailed really well in that Wall Street Journal article that we've talked about called the Facebook Files, and it's just tragic. Power of Facebook and the power of social media is tremendous, and with great power comes great responsibility, to quote Spider-Man, or whoever wrote that. I don't know exactly who the original author of that is, but the point is Facebook has a lot of responsibility, and the criticism that they're getting, I personally believe, is highly warranted. And this is an example of impacts outside the United States, but this isn't just an anomaly and a one-off. This kind of thing has been happening in multiple places. So that perhaps there's a lot of depressing sides to this, but one is that coming up with some regulation tomorrow for Facebook is really not going to solve this problem. And I am not at all expecting to get a call back from this. But on a related personal note, I will mention that I attended a job fair a couple weeks ago, a virtual one on a Friday. Facebook wasn't present, but they had a booth, and so you could go check out their different job postings. And I actually did apply for a position. I think it's in Europe, and it has to do with ethics. But we need folks in Facebook. Frances Haugen didn't feel like she was successful or could be successful in moving the needle with the ethical behavior of Facebook. But I personally think that's what we need to push for. Maybe even more so than regulation, because this is the speed of change and the delay or lag, I guess is what I'm looking for. The lag that we see in regulation around a lot of these issues. We need to have ethical and moral leaders in all companies and in all organizations. But yeah, I think it's another dramatic example of how we need change, and that change can come about in different ways. And I would say, we need to be encouraging the leadership and the employees of Facebook to do the right thing. And maybe that sounds silly, but I think that is as viable an option now as hoping that regulation is going to solve these issues. Hopefully we're going to get some privacy law in the United States at some point, right? And that's going to be, I think, a step in the right direction. But we just haven't had any good news out of Facebook for quite a while. So the announcement of the metaverse and thinking we're moving to the Ready Player One world, I guess, may be perceived by some as exciting, but that's still about investments that they're making in a future that they're trying to bring about, rather than something that's happening today.
Well, and related to that, The Verge reported yesterday that Meta, this new umbrella company that Facebook has evolved into, is starting to really lock down message or communication internally, in part because of the extraordinary number of links that have happened at the company for the last couple years. and it's slowing down research, it's slowing down internal conversation, and there's starting to be kind of what I perceive after reading the article is that less and less people at Facebook are part of critical conversations and are receiving the fruits of internal research. And one thing I'll give credit to is I do think that Facebook does spend a fair bit of time in the research field. Like they want to understand better how these tools are used and maybe misused too. But it also seems like from the leaks is that they aren't always paying attention to negative results that their own internal research talks about. And I think the bottom line is if Facebook is going to survive into the future, its users need to trust it. And one of the things that seems overwhelmingly obvious to me is that there are at least of my friends on Facebook, and I'm friends, quote unquote friends with 800-900 people on Facebook. And it's a tool I use to stay connected with people that otherwise I wouldn't have a chance to have direct communication with. The bottom line, though, is that a lot of people are leaving Facebook and don't seem interested in coming back. The same is also true of things like Instagram and Twitter, but it doesn't seem nearly as profound as Facebook. And I just think that there's a lot of people that simply don't trust the platform. And I don't think plugging leaks, to use perhaps a more positive vernacular, or maybe a more honest way of looking at it is shutting down all internal to external communication is really the way to go about this. Like I feel like there needs to be an honest conversation with the community about Facebook and other social media technologies to see if there's ways that we can evolve it for the better. And like I've talked about in the past, it's not all bad news, because there's a lot of great in social media technologies. It's just that we have to have critical community conversations about what the limits are, and we need the tools to be regulated, whether it's internally regulated or externally regulated, in order to prevent some of the clear implications of those technologies. And locking down, I don't think is the way to go about that.
And I think the broader problem at Facebook is really a lack of leadership. I mean, I just don't think that Mark Zuckerberg has an ethical worldview and the vision to move the company forward in the way that a lot of people would hope he would. I don't think he has that as a leader. And can he acquire that? I don't know. I don't see any hints or anything that would make me optimistic about that. I know there's been a lot of folks making fun of just all the apologies and, the repetition about, well, sorry, we'll try to do better. I put a link, actually, I didn't put it in, I guess I could put it in Facebook too, but I put it in YouTube for that position. It's called Privacy Policy Manager, AI Policy and Governance. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of really, really smart people at Facebook that are working to do this, but it does appear that they're in much more of a damage control, mode. Although with Meta, I don't know, in terms of messaging and when there's crises, I mean, people want to try to control the narrative and not just be responsive and reactive. And it kind of feels like that was part of what Facebook did with their Meta announcement, was to try to talk about the future and talk about some other things, perhaps besides just all of these terrible things. I mean, one of the fundamental issues, and I think I talked about this article, maybe it was in the last 2 weeks, it might have been last week, but it was this really, really great, I think it was a Wall Street Journal article too. There was like 10 different authors that all talked about how to fix social media. And, some of them are talking about the foundational economic theory of surveillance capitalism that undergirds all this, and saying, this is what's broken. Nobody that I know of in a significant position of government or corporate leadership is saying at this point, outside of academia and journalism, we need to, completely turn this model on its head and not allow surveillance capitalism to be the governing model of what we see happening right now with so much of our social media and internet platforms today, where we trade data for free services and companies sell those at a huge profit, and then folks can do a lot of different things with that data. So, it just I do think to remain optimistic and not to get real pessimistic, it is good for us to think about local issues and not to just have our headspace on these big national issues, because, it can be very uh, distressing and even depressing to focus there. But on the other hand, look at the local issues in Ethiopia. Look at the way that Facebook and the ways that it's being utilized and abused, is leading to a lot of harm. So yeah, we need to continue to grapple with this. And if anybody out there is listening to podcasts, I know one that I haven't checked in with in a while is Ethan Zuckerberg's The Future of the Internet. I mean, there's some really great thinking and great work that different groups are doing around these issues, but I don't know that we're gonna. I don't know. You would think that if things were going to coalesce to a point where we're going to have legislation and change, maybe it would happen, and the Francis Haugen testimony has really seemed to push us in that direction. I don't know what it will take for us, for instance, just to get some privacy legislation in the United States, which would be, I think, a positive step forward. So, sometimes it just kind of feels like we're slogging back into the bog of, the mud of all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, it's such a mess. And I don't know that, other than having, it's sort of like, security and cyber attacks and hacks, right? Oh, there was another breach. There were millions more
Right.
breached, and it just sounds like it's sort of the same story over and over again. So I apologize for people who are like, this show is garbage. All they do is say that the social media landscape is very polluted and it's terrible and it's being weaponized by bad actors. I do want to say more than that, but anyway.
Well, and the bottom line too is that I mean, this is why it's so complex for me personally. Wes and I would not even know each other if it wasn't for social media, right? Social media and the technologies that we utilize to stay in connection. There's simply no alternative to them in the non-social media world, right? Like we met via Twitter. It led to face-to-face meetings later when we were in the same place at the same time. And now we host a podcast together where we have an opportunity to once a week have an hour-long conversation about topics that interest us. I'm glad you're listening, dear listener, but that's not the reason why we do this, right? Like we like to have listeners. We certainly want to share some thoughts we have and get your feedback. But the bottom line is that we continue to do this week to week because it's something that allows us to have an opportunity to have a professional and a collegial conversation that we're happy to invite you to listen to, and that wouldn't have happened short of social media technologies.
Absolutely. And I want to tell a little story here. So I just dropped a link into my food blog. So I part of the reason, and I think I wrote about this tonight actually in a post, part of the reason I enjoy sharing food so much and I love cooking, but it's just like, it's great to focus on, right? It's not politics, it's not negative, and people can get around that and get excited about it. Well, Sue Waters, shout out to Sue, who's in Australia. I think she's still in Perth. She used to do a lot with Edublogs. Anyway, it's amazing. She helped me troubleshoot my WordPress image issue that I had this week. And like, there's no way, absent Facebook, which is where we made this connection, that I would be getting that help. I needed to make my header image 2,000 pixels wide and I had it too short. And sure enough, I did that tonight and it worked. Part of the thing that I loved in the early days of the read write web, or the web 2.0, the web 2.0, as we used to call it, in the mid 2000s, was these kinds of connections that you would have with especially other teachers and educators, that there's no way you would have ever been able to encounter these folks, hang out with these people, learn from them. And I actually think part of what I want to do, and have dabbled in a little bit, is kind of getting back to some of that as far as podcasts and blogs. Social media has really reduced the friction. Some people talk about it's frictionless, it's so easy. And part of that can be dangerous too. I think it's Clay Shirky in that How to Fix Social Media, in his article, talks about that when things are so fast and frictionless, that leads to virality and to some of the problems that we see with the speed with which things are shared and the lack of vetting and the lack of even reading, right? Because sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, we just share headlines. We don't necessarily read the whole article in depth. So anyway, shout out to Sue. And maybe that's something for all of us to think about in terms of where we really are finding the value in social media, the investments that we can make. And I've always enjoyed focusing on and talking about transformative uses and, relationships, friendships. And there's just hey, we're on a podcast here. And yes, in fact, I think we have an article about how disinformation is being shared and has been, rampantly shared on podcasts, but on the same, at the same time, this platform has tremendous, incredible power. I mean, Jason, who would have ever thought that you and I could just basically, open up a computer in our houses and then on a regular basis just sit down and have a conversation like we're literally sitting across the table from each other. I mean, we can take this for granted now, but I mean, this is absolutely incredible with basically zero latency. And Peggy's here with us too, and we're having this conversation. Sometimes other people come as well, but it is just this is really, really positive. So I'm glad to kind of put that little twist on it a little bit, because again, we maybe we sort of fell into that hole at one point with security. We still talk about security articles, but we don't talk about and there's some data breach articles in the show notes this week, so we can talk about that too. But it's important to maintain perspective and to also think about our focus. And so I really do appreciate these tools and these platforms. And we had a parent university conversation about social media influencers a couple weeks ago for our school that I helped lead. And I was really proud of one of our administrative leaders, because sometimes I don't hear these kinds of stories. She just shared a great story about her daughter being able to connect to she went across the country to college, and because of social media, she arrived with a lot of friends because they had already made these connections, already learned all these things about each other. It was just very, very positive. I think we do a disservice to social media and to each other if we are only telling the negative stories. And that is unfortunately too often what we read in the news. And if we at the EdTech Situation Room were to just, read you the negative, if it bleeds, it leads news about social media, that might be the impression we would give as well. So wonderful things are happening on social media every single day. Jason and I are the beneficiaries of it. And we need to remember that for ourselves, and then also in the stories that we tell other people, right? Because plenty of people have been scared off of social media, and lots of folks probably still are. And there's a lot of good conversations and good opportunities to learn and grow together. And hey, and maybe even learn to cook better food or new foods or whatever. Like, there's all kinds of great ways that these technologies have been used and are being used. So we'll maintain that perspective.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Well, should we? I have a couple more social media related articles, maybe.
Yeah. And then I'd like to go to the security one. There's an amazing security article I'd like to talk about today.
And there's a couple practical things I want to talk about tonight too. So, I'm mentioning this mostly to maybe send me a little bit another direction, but there was an article in today's Verge about how the co-founder of YouTube has predicted the decline of the platform following the removal of dislikes, and he's talked about how it's a bit of a universally disliked change. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this name. Jawad Karim is one of the co-founders. This is 16 years ago of YouTube. And it's referred to as the third co-founder of YouTube, saying that it's heading in the wrong direction, and the public response to it is part of this. And we had a great description last week about why that they went in this direction and the positive piece of that. And that article did turn me a bit, because I was pretty curious about this too. The one thing I would say, and the reason why I wanted to mention this particular topic, is that I have seen some arguments in the last week about how it does also help identify incorrect or misinformation too. And I'll give you an example of this. Like almost everyone else, YouTube is a bit of a flea market of information for me. And there's an extraordinary amount of technology tutorials, how to root your Android phone, how to replace the battery in your Dell XPS laptop, how to replace the screen on your Samsung phone, how to fix or refurbish an old iPod, which was kind of one of my pandemic hobbies. And I'm trying to see if my iPod, my working iPod is here. We talked about this a little last year, but I have, I did take an old iPod and replace the battery and put an SSD drive in it. So now it's a 256 gigabyte iPod, which is massive. And it's got an SSD drive, so it's got a better battery life. I mention this because one of the strategies I use when I'm looking for tutorial videos, there are a lot of tutorial videos that are either outdated or are fake, right? They're just not, they're intended to be kind of a, LOL released to the community, not one that's intended to enlighten or educate the populace. And I oftentimes won't bother with a technology trick on YouTube if the dislikes well outnumber the likes. And if there's 25 likes and no dislikes, that also is a sign to me that's a valid piece. And again, I'll refer you to last week's episode to talk about the pretty good reasons why they head in this direction. But I do think that there is a point to be made that it is an information a savvy tool to utilize to help do this. And you will have to see where it goes, I guess. Is the other thing I would also note there, I don't think there's an alternative to a viable alternative to YouTube, right? That's where people host video, right? Billions of minutes of video are uploaded. I think it's a year now is where the billion numbers go. I mean, we contribute 60 minutes just a week, just between the two of us, let alone what I know Dr. Fryer does, who has a long history of posting stuff to YouTube. I don't know if people leave in droves. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me, but it is interesting to watch the community respond to that change.
Well, and that article, as I scanned it here, doesn't seem to address the core issue that the video that I think we had in the show notes last week from YouTube talked about, and that was these coordinated attacks that people have been doing against creators. And so it's this idea of sort of cancel culture, or which I don't know. And I need to get a little more defined in whether, I don't use the word fake news at all, talking to students at all. I talk about polluted information and verifying information. Cancel culture is one of these words in the phrases in the culture war that's been, co-opted and weaponized and whatever. But the idea that we can try to, kick people off of the internet, we can, have so many attacks and trolls, and they can be doxxed, right? Their real life cell number and address and things like that can be put out, and they can just face a horrendous amount of harassment, both digitally online and in some cases in person, in the face-to-face real world. That is the issue that they were talking about needing to address. And sometimes these are small-time creators, but they have political or cultural or other opinions that people don't like. And so in order to address them, these people are attacked. It's like a nuclear bomb. People are trying to collaboratively nuke these people, blow up their world, and get them to, stop talking and communicating at all because they disagree with them. And that is absolutely not a way that we should be engaging in a civil society. And so I think that article by this YouTube co-founder, much to his intelligence and savvy and being a co-founder of YouTube, yay, good job for you. He didn't address those issues. And this is a critical thing. Sometimes we form in our own minds an idea about a platform, or I think this happened with Wikipedia in the early days. A lot of teachers, I know Joyce Valenza is a co-author, I think, or maybe she just shared it. I think she's a co-author on a really nice article recently that was talking about, hey, we got to look at Wikipedia and the value of it and how it can be utilized, and stop trying to tell, kids and adults and everyone, it's horrible, it's terrible, and never use it. I think that when it comes to YouTube, sometimes we're not aware of how dynamic and changeable the environment has been. I mentioned this over a year ago. I'm sure there was a great 3-part series that Destin, who has the video channel Smarter Every Day, did on the weaponization of social media. He did an episode specific about YouTube, one specific about Facebook, and one specific to Twitter. But I mean, watch the one about YouTube, and I'll grab the link. I'll try to grab the link here in a minute and put it in the show notes. It is unbelievable. And these are the ways that, different folks are gaming the SEO algorithm, trying to get around content ID, trying to flood the channel with, quote, excrement, to quote a former member of the last administration, Steve Bannon, who talked about that. It's part of a strategy to try to just flood the channel with disinformation and with crap, literally. It's just amazing because, yes, to Jason's point, there's a lot of video that's being uploaded, but there's a lot of it being uploaded by computers, and there are algorithms that are being used to generate content and to slightly modify the content just enough so that Content ID doesn't say, oh, that's a copyright violation. Anyway, and that stuff is a couple years old. So I'm glad to see Facebook taking action. This is related to the tech correction because we're talking about changes that social media companies and tech companies are making in response to different dynamics in the environment as well as criticism. And so where I don't see Facebook doing much substantive, I do see YouTube and Google, making some changes. And so anytime you're going to make a change to a platform, it's like, if Twitter, for instance, let you edit any of your tweets, they did increase the number of characters, right? Did we go up to 240? I think we did, from 140 maybe.
Yeah.
So there's people that were critical there, but anyway, I think it's a dynamic information environment, and I've been I re-listened to one of my favorite books of all time. It's by Stephen B. Johnson, and he did a PBS series about it. How did we get to now? And it's all about big time innovations. And innovations are oftentimes not utilized in the same way that the creators and inventors thought that they would be. This has happened throughout time. And the ways that these things get utilized, it goes directions that people would not have been able to predict. And so we're going to continue to see that, with social media and technology in different ways. And obviously some of those ways are negative and dark. And that's part of why we need moral and ethical human beings to be involved in trying to, affect the design and the ways and the rules of engagement, and also perhaps the kinds of government regulations that are in effect there. So I'm personally glad to see YouTube and Facebook making some changes to try to address these issues. Are they going to be perfect? No, but I think we need to see some changes, because if we don't, the instances of bad actors, doing bad things is not going to necessarily be abated at all. And those things need to be addressed.
And then I want to do one last kind of quick article here that's social media-ish, just because it's so interesting how it's playing out. But Spotify has acquired, according to The Verge on November 11th, a company that's called Findaway, which is I guess an audiobook services company is the best way to describe them. The company provides several services, including distribution of audiobooks to various platforms. It also has an audiobook creation service that allows authors to pair up with professional and semi-professional narrators to create audiobooks. And it's one of the interesting kind of unknown parts of Spotify. It's kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. There are audiobooks available on Spotify that you can simply take a look at and listen to. The reason why this is interesting to me is because I'm a massive
audio consumer.
Yeah, well, I am, but I also am a huge fan of Audible, right? And that service. The problem with Audible, though, is it's really great for me, and I know that there are ways for libraries to utilize Audible like services for access to audiobooks for kids. but I wish that there was better accessible platforms so they could be rolled out more easily in K-12 classrooms. And Spotify's been doing a lot of interesting things with various podcast recording services and tools that you can utilize. In fact, I'm working on a presentation for the Northwest Council for Computer Education conference in February in Seattle, where I'm going to both talk about in separate sessions podcasting as a content reservoir, and then separately podcasting as a classroom publication piece, which does feel very much like a 2005 presentation. The problem is that I feel like podcasting keeps getting easier, and there are obviously wonderful classroom examples of it implemented, but I still feel like it's an underutilized structure of EdTech inside of classrooms. But I thought it was pretty interesting. I really do very much like some of the decisions that Spotify has made, although as we've talked about in the past, they really do need to dramatically improve the podcasting listening structure for it to become a dominant player in that field. So that's all I want to say there.
Did you, that last article that you had tweeted, is that in the show notes? That's the New York Times piece talking about.
Oh, it's not. Although let's go ahead and talk about that now, and
let's talk about it. Okay, so you want to start, or you want me to?
Hold on, I need to get the article up. So
okay, the article is called "On Podcasts and Radio, Misleading COVID-19 Talk Goes Unchecked." It's a New York Times article, and the reason it just came to mind is, private companies are different than the government. Amendments to the United States Constitution provide for limits on what the government can do. Private companies are able to really kind of do whatever they want. This article points out that while YouTube, again, to favorably talk about Google, because Jason and I are Google fanboys here, Google continues to do a bunch of things like deplatforming some folks and, having consequences for people who are repeatedly spreading disinformation, for instance, about COVID-19. Lots of platforms are really not. Spotify, not really doing a lot. iHeartRadio, which has hundreds of AM stations and hundreds of podcasts, really not doing a lot. And that's one of the main groups that's focused on that. Apple as well. And this is a mess, right? I mean, when private companies start to step in and say, hey, you can't say that, and then you're going to try and enforce as a general policy, hey, if somebody says, if somebody is spreading disinformation, let's say around the COVID-19 vaccine or on the issues of COVID-19, man, the challenges of policing that and then determining with nuance, okay, did that step over the line? Did it not? We're talking about a very formidable task. One of the things I've mentioned on the show here, and I'm not watching our Facebook feed, but both YouTube and Facebook have real-time voice-to-text transcription. So they do a pretty reasonable job transcribing the words that Jason and I say and putting that on the screen, but then that's also available somewhere else. And that means that can be searchable. And so, if we were living in China and we, for instance, were going to talk about Western China, and even in saying this, I'm aware of the fact that, am I going to mark myself for, next time I try to travel to China? Oh my gosh, you said this. But if you want to talk about the oppression of the Uyghur minority, the Muslim minority in Western China, and the ways in which we believe authorities do, over 1 million, maybe as many as 2 million people have been moved into these re-education camps. And anyway, that whole thing, you cannot talk about that. And then there's other issues too, right? With Tiananmen Square and, things that the Chinese government does not want their public to know about. And they are actively making sure that at least behind the Great Firewall of China, these things are not allowed. Anyway, it is messy. It's challenging. I thought it was an excellent article. So do you have some comments on it as well?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that every one of these technologies is the same. It's incredibly empowering to have the ability to publish out internationally a weekly podcast. And okay, Wes and I are nerds, right? But and we had to go through a couple of iterations to make our technology setup the technology setup we wanted. And thank goodness for StreamYard, because the bottom line is that without StreamYard, especially with other services shutting down, this is by far the easiest platform I've ever used to broadcast. In fact, I use this in part with my day job at Montana Digital Academy. I participate in some other streams with the Northwest Council of Computer Education. It's a fabulous platform. But it took us a little while to land here, right? But it's really not hard to publish a podcast. There are thousands of great tutorials online. I love all of Dan Benjamin's stuff from the 5x5 network, because he talks a lot about kind of podcast publication. It's very democratizing. But just like blogs, just like social media, just like Twitter accounts, the power of these platforms goes in both directions. In the same way, we love to empower students by helping them tell stories and share their experiences and question the world. Bad actors can be also problematic in that way. So, again, not terrible that this technology enables, but it just comes with a balance in both directions, and we have to be mindful of that.
And on the note of Spotify, back to that article, I mean, we do want great companies to stay profitable, right? I love Spotify. I mean, at this point, I'm very heavily invested in its playlists. I mean, back in the day, I think I wrote a post about this on Facebook over the weekend. I made mixtapes, right? Now, how do kids know about mixtapes? It's because they've seen Guardians of the Galaxy and there's a mixtape on it. But like, that was a thing, and it was time consuming, and you had one copy of it because we didn't really do high speed dubbing or whatever. I mean, our school musical this weekend was Mamma Mia. Our daughter was in it, and it was lovely. It was so fun. And I made a Spotify playlist, and not only is it there for me, I share it on social media. I don't know if anybody else has listened to it or not, but I listen to some playlists that classmates of mine from high school have made and shared. It's crazy. It's crazy that kind of power is in our fingertips. So anyway, I'm just saying that I want Spotify to hang around. I don't want them to take over podcasting to the point of, oh my gosh, now, if you're not on Spotify, behind their paywall, there's no way you can be a podcaster. I really don't think that's going to happen. People feared, Apple, and when they put podcasting inside iTunes, and famously Leo Laporte on the Twit network said, we're going to call them netcasts because we're, is Apple taking over the word podcast? So Anyway, I'm glad to see them monetizing. But on the other hand, it's wonderful to have a vibrant culture of media production and sharing, which is outside the control of a particular of one single government or entity. But you get the good with the bad with that. I mean, and hopefully we're on the side of the good, but that's a subjective opinion. So whatever people think.
Well, and one other thing I want to say about both Spotify and also the kind of free flow of information. Spotify is complicated in part because I do think it has negatively impacted the finances of music, and I don't think that that's necessarily a black and white issue. It's complicated, but it's something that I am mindful of. But then the other thing I want to also mention, based on what you just said, Dr. Fryer, is that I also think we still need to find ways to provide micro payments to producers, right? Like, I don't see us going to advertising anytime soon. And I'll just repeat what I said earlier in this show. I'm glad you're tuning in. I hope you find value in this. But the bottom line is that for me, this is just a real opportunity to have a good conversation every week with a trusted colleague and friend, right? So, so we don't need money out of this, right? And we also would very much acknowledge that even if we monetize this podcast, it's not like we're quitting our day jobs to take over the airwaves. It would be nice, however, and I would very much participate in if we could find something. And Patreon is close, right? Like. And I engage. I think I fund 7 or 8 creators now on Patreon. Not fund like I'm sending them thousands of dollars. I contribute to several creators. via a Patreon, and that's great, right? But the bottom line is that I really feel like that we should be building systems where, it caught, I give 5 cents to a producer every week I listen to their podcast, or I give 50 cents or 75 cents. I think it would help revolutionize publicly funded, public listener funded efforts like PBS and NPR. It would also help podcasting out quite a bit too. And not everyone would want to participate. And again, we're a good example of that because we're not doing this for financial gain by any stretch of the imagination. It's a contribution we like to make to the community, but in the end, it's really a conversation between two fellas. So, I think that's part of this conversation too.
Okay, maybe that should be an outcome of today's show, is that we should dabble with that. I'm a big fan of playing with media and iterating around the creation of media products. And I think I'm absolutely in agreement that micro payments and the micro payment economy is an important, still nascent, but growing thing. Substack, as well as Patreon and some of these other tools, are enabling some people to quit their day jobs and exclusively, be journalists out there, without a tie to Spotify or Disney or, some major network. Maybe we can talk a little bit more offline about that, because we've talked about maybe doing that. I mean, there's a few costs, right? I think Spotify or StreamYard is like $20 a month or $15 a month. There is some small charge that we have, but I'm glad again to pay that because this platform is phenomenal and I don't want it to go away. Yeah. They were purchased by somebody or had some kind of merger, and I was like, anytime that happens, you're like, remember what happened to Posters? And what about Nuzzle, man? I miss Nuzzle every day. I think Peggy was a Nuzzle user as well. That was a wonderful app that would take the articles shared by people you follow on Twitter and Facebook and then prioritize them and let you know what they are. Anyway, and it went away. Twitter bought them and basically killed the platform. So anyway, I think we should talk about that a little bit, because we learn as we dabble in some media creation or in using some different tools. We learn some things, and perhaps that is something we can do to offset a few costs as well as learn a little bit about it. Let's talk about some security things since we got about 12 minutes left. I'll do two quick articles. These are both from Ars Technica from today. Headline: Hackers backed by Iran are targeting U.S. critical infrastructure, U.S. warns. And I will tell you guys that the more I read articles and books and things like that, and I was a tech director for 4 years recently, about cyber, like the target on our backs, both as individuals, but as communities and as a nation state, with cyber attacks, it just keeps in many ways getting bigger and bigger. And so what this article says is that there are some acknowledged published vulnerabilities which have been patched by the company, by Fortinet, which is a big firewall company, and I think Microsoft is the other big one. Yeah, Microsoft Exchange. And so unfortunately, IT departments aren't always fast to put in their patches, and so Iranian hackers have now been identified as specifically exploiting these for ransomware attacks and for the kinds of attacks that allow them to get inside systems and then do things, later. So as I contemplate our move, which we're hoping to leave the state of Oklahoma this summer, and I have 11 job applications out actually now. About half of those are with universities for an assistant professor position and some other things too.
Hire this guy.
Yeah, that's right. You need to hire me. I would love for us to be in a place where we think about, how resilient can we be if there's some kind of a power grid failure or some kind of significant cyber attack that's going to affect critical infrastructure. I don't want to be, I don't know what the right, the doomsday guy, but, we have not seen here in the United States, as they have in the Ukraine, as they have in Belarus. I mean, Russia's kind of, tried to flex their muscles and show what they can do and experiment with what they can do with countries that are very geographically close to them. There's been some terrible things that they've done. Those countries, especially Belarus, has really responded in some savvy and I think very forward-looking ways to all that. So anyway, impact of that article for education. We certainly need to be talking about passwords, and that kind of gets to the next article on the practical side about being safe. But we also need to be in our schools, in our colleges. We need to be focused on helping raise awareness about the importance of cyber and how we need students to be, studying the courses, taking the classes, and having the interest in that field to protect us. I think cyber warriors today are every bit as important as, physical warriors that are going to be holding a gun or, flying a drone or all the different things that members of the military that protect us and members of, security forces and all that do. So that was security article number one. The second one, also from Ars Technica, this is one of the best, practical security articles I have read in months. It's by Sean Gallagher. It's called Securing Your Digital Lifestyle, the Finale, Debunking Worthless Security Practices. This would be a great article to share with your faculty at school, share with your parents, share with everybody, because what he asks are, what are some of the worst advice he's asking security professionals that you've heard people repeat that is just not true? Like, you should change your password every 30 days. Like, never write down your password. Hello, those of us that are using a password manager, who is not having in a secure and safe place your backup codes for your password manager, right? I mean, if you lose access to your password manager, that would be it's what's the word for, something that's societal ending? It's not it's not life ending, but it would be tremendously stressful and painful to lose control of your password manager. So, password managers like 1Password have this thing they call the emergency kit. They encourage you to print it and then put it in a place like your Fire file or your safety deposit box or whatever to keep that safe. But that is one of those things, as this article points out, people have heard this. It's been in media. They've just, they get this idea, never write it down, never write it down. Well, don't take a sticky note and put your password, under your keyboard or on your monitor. Yeah. But to say don't ever write something down, that is just bad advice. And it goes on. Some people will say that two-factor is too scary to do. That's ridiculous. And then this one's interesting, Jason. I'd like to hear your response. They say it's a myth to say my VPN protects me. They say that for most people, this is at home, not necessarily when you're out in coffee shops and stuff like that. But for most folks, you probably don't actually need a VPN. The HTTPS, modern secure, encryption that websites use are pretty effective in protecting your privacy. What you're not protecting yourself from is your service provider, your ISP, seeing the requests that you are making. And then also saying that you don't need an antivirus on Windows machines. It's just a great article, and I thought it was a nice way to approach that. So I am not in a place today in my life where I am briefing our enterprise community on security and passwords as I did for 4 years. But if I was, this is a very nice tactic to take. And, even if you're a presenter, you're talking about security, like talking about the myths, the commonly held beliefs that people have and why those are false. I think that's really powerful. So great article. What's your thought on the VPN idea that maybe most people don't need a VPN, at least from home? Do you think that's accurate?
I do. The article is really interesting. They gave some examples of where VPN might be useful with you at home. For example, I utilize the University of Montana VPN when I want to access on-campus resources. So if I go to the library, the digital library, and I want to access databases and not have to sign in for it, all I need to do is get in my VPN, which is literally one click on my laptop, and then I've access to UM-based resources, which is a good security protocol. I also think that if you are on sketchy Wi-Fi and you are using secure, if you're in any way doing anything secure like HTTPS or secure HTTP, should be good enough to do that privacy. I like the extra protection of a VPN as well. So I just think that when you're trafficking in my case and in Dr. Fryer's case as well, all of our school stuff tends to traffic in student data. You're probably secure with an HTTPS site, which is, almost every EdTech tool and system will be an HTTPS. I just think we should do our due diligence to, utilize those resources whenever possible. But it's certainly not a catch-all for security. And I also agree that VPNs, to quote the article, VPNs aren't much more effective in protecting your privacy than what you already get from visiting sites using HTTPS. That's also true. That said, there are a lot of very specialized scenarios that, if you are on a network and the surfing you're doing puts you at risk for whatever reason, you're doing private research, you're trying to, as much as possible, maybe visit sites to kind of cover your tracks for whatever reason. And that sounds sketchy, but I could think of lots of legitimate reasons why you might want to do so. A VPN will allow you to do that. So, but yeah, this is super interesting. And just at first blush, I agree with most of this stuff. Like changing your password every 30 days it's terrible. I don't think it does much, and it really discourages, I think, using secure passwords. I also encourage people to write down passwords, and they make a great, you don't put it on a sticky note on your monitor, but, as an example of this, we've talked about this in the past, there are additional codes. If you turn on two-factor authentication, they allow you to get into like your Google account. If you don't have access to your method of doing two-factor authentication, I've done that for every one of my Google accounts I've locked down with 2FA, because I may not have access to my phone or the Google account. So if I'm traveling internationally, for example, and I need access to Google or my Google account because it's got important stuff in it, I would want to carry those passcodes with me. And some guy do a great tweet here. Patrick Kelly says, "Don't put your password in your wallet. You will literally have to kick my ass to get it." Heck of a lot stronger than a notepad. And he's absolutely right? Like, if you're carrying it with you, it's as secure as your credit card is. And if you're using basic, security for those pieces, then sure, carry your 10 codes in your wallet with you. So yeah, I great article, really wonderful article.
All right. Well, what else would you like to get tonight? Because we got about 5 minutes left.
I just want to note one piece, and then I'm happy to end things with the Geek of the Week. But The Verge has an article that talks about how the global chip shortage is limiting a lot of Christmas cheer this year, in particular, as the holidays become a shopping season. Things like Switches and PS5s and a bunch of consumer electronics are starting to report significant shortages. And so, maybe this is the year to make baked goods for your family, and
meat, or smoke meat if you can deliver it.
Yeah, well, and let's be clear that the temptation of me buying various implements of meat smoking it becomes higher and higher by the week. But just something to keep in mind. And if you're waiting around for deals, some things aren't going to have deals this year, just because there's a shortage of them. It's likely to drive either the cost up or make availability quite limited. So something to keep in mind as you engage in shopping.
So 2 thoughts. We could do a non-EdTech SR show just on Jason brings his smoker questions, and then I can bring all the answers that I have. That'd be fun. And then the other thing is, maybe we could reach out to our friend Eric Langhorst up in Liberty, who has been on the show and helped us kind of kick off the show with the year in review. Maybe we could do this, like each of us pick like 5 tech-related gifts, which could be subscriptions or something else, and then we just talk over those in the course of an hour.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know. I'll reach out to him and see, and maybe we can get that set up here, probably sooner rather than later, just because of shopping. If you do it right before the holidays, people don't have time to buy those things or order them because of the supply chain. So
yeah,
okay, sounds good.
What is your Geek of the Week, sir?
All right. Well, I'm doing 2. The Earth view from Google Earth. I actually haven't mentioned this. I use different extensions on my Chrome browser, and this is the one that I have up on my school browser. I'm opening up new tabs all the time in front of kids, and every time if you have this installed that you open a new tab, you get a new awesome view from Google Earth. And then if you click in the corner, it'll actually take you in the browser-based version of Google Earth to that location, and you can explore it. It's phenomenal. One of the bummers is I don't think it keeps a history of where you've been, and so like even just today, I brought one up and then closed it, and they were like, "Where was that?" And I'm like, I have no idea, and I don't think I can get back to it. But it is really, really cool. And after I showed it to my 5th graders today, they were like, "Can we, show that?" And I put it in our Google Classroom, and some of the kids installed it, so that's kind of cool. And then this is actually from my wife and our lower division or elementary campus. This is the Cellcase Vintage Retro 3.5 millimeter telephone handset call phone receiver. It's like the longest title ever. Basically, it is an iOS microphone, but it is only $12. It looks just like an old school phone, and it works great. And so I'd heard about these a while back, maybe from Seesaw teachers talking about it, but we've got iPads for all of our 1st through 4th graders now, and they can record with the built-in mic, and it's actually pretty good. But in terms of doing a little bit of limiting on ambient noise and just quality, and the kids are holding the phone up to their ear, and it's only $12. So you get a little nostalgia, old school, like, oh look, they're talking on the phone, but they're actually recording into their iPad. So I thought that was cool.
Yep, that's pretty great. And then I just want to share a tool that that actually matches our conversation earlier. As we've talked about 2 years ago, I started the process of setting up an independent secure password for every website that I utilize, and then keep it under a password manager. And for me, LastPass is my preferred password manager. But one of the ways I do that is I tend to use 16 or 20 character randomly generated passwords from securepassword.net, I think, is the name of my tool. And I literally go and type the word secure password into Google to find every time. It's secure password generator at passwordgenerator.net, and you can actually preset settings and get a specialized link so you can go back to the same one every time. But that's how I do my password generation for websites.
Awesome. Well, you guys can find me on wesfryer.com. How about you, Dr. Neiffer?
I'm at Tech Savvy Teach on Twitter, and I guess we haven't talked about this before, but I'm unavailable next Wednesday, so okay. I think we'll have to take a little holiday break next week.
Yes, yeah, a turkey break. Well, let me just ask you this: what are the menu items on the Neiffer menu? Will you be cooking said turkey? And do you have a technique for cooking said turkey?
That's a great question. So I'm going to my parents this year. So and it's only the second time I've seen my parents since COVID. So we're gonna all test up next week, and I'll have the opportunity to spend the holiday with my parents, which is wonderful. And my parents, the last couple of years have been a little minimalistic on Thanksgiving, but the one thing I absolutely cannot miss any Thanksgiving is I'm a huge stuffing fan. So, and stuffing is one of those things that tends to be region specific, even mother specific, but I have a certain kind of a set of ingredients. It's really a kind of a hand down from my grandmother, who made a kind of a German version of stuffing. So there's sausage in our stuffing, lots of breadcrumbs, sometimes there's walnuts, but it's my favorite part of Thanksgiving, hands down.
Okay, so in lieu of next week's show, which, yes, we will be off next week, I propose, Jason, we each share a Thanksgiving recipe. And if you, sir, would be willing to share that stuffing recipe, I think that would be excellent. Yep. And I will come up with something to share as well. And and I'm going to be spatchcock cooking our turkey, which is basically when you cut out the spine and flatten the bird. So I think I may end up actually cooking two. But yeah, it'll be the first year to smoke the turkeys.
Well, and maybe we're just getting off into a rabbit hole here about food 5 minutes after the podcast was supposed to end. But I did see your Instagram post on spatchcocking, and I'm honestly surprised you haven't heard of it before. I've done it with a chicken 3 or 4 times. It is such an amazing way because it allows you to flatten out the bird.
Oh, yeah.
So you can evenly cook it. And I've done I'm a little intimidated by it because I'm not very good with the kitchen shears, which is the way to do it with a chicken.
Right.
But when I've done it, it just, some people talk about brick chicken, which is flattening the chicken out, and when you roast it in the oven or on a barbecue. But spatchcocking makes it just so even and
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
tasty.
Absolutely. My mom had given me some pretty formidable kitchen shears a few years ago, which worked great on the chicken. So
That's great.
I'm gonna do that. So yeah, Peggy, if you want to contribute a recipe, any listener out there, tweet at us at EdTechSR. Share your Thanksgiving recipe. That has nothing to do with tech news, but hey, you know what? It's the holiday season, and Thanksgiving is one of those traditions that everybody probably has a slightly different twist on it in the United States as far as what you eat and how you celebrate it. And that's kind of fun to get to share. Again, the positive side of social media. See, we are going to tie it back to the themes of the show.
Yep, absolutely. Well, hey, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, listeners. Dr. Fryer, happy Thanksgiving to you and the whole Fryer clan. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take great care, and we hope to see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room.
Adios, everyone.